Now on Mississippi Insight, State Auditor Shad and some of his fellow Republicans just don't see eye to eye. Heated exchanges with lawmakers follow his controversial report on state government waste. We'll speak with State Auditor White about that and his legislative priorities this week on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown on broadcast and on podcast. Thank you for joining us for this February 9th edition of Insight. Ever since his 2018 appointment and his subsequent election win, State Auditor Shad has built a reputation for aggressively auditing state agencies and those who use public funding. He's been a vocal critic of waste in state government, especially in education and social services spending. Now, 7 years later, the Republican from Sandersville continues to press for big changes in government spending, and he's looking ahead to a potential run for the governor's office. State Auditor Shad now joins us. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start off with TANF. You have been pursuing court action against Brett Favre and others who are reportedly giving the TANF funds. What is the status of this case right now? Where do we stand here?
So there's two different tracks in the welfare scandal. The first is criminal. So in the criminal cases, 7 people have now pleaded guilty to either state or federal charges, and 1 person remains to be tried. They'll be tried by federal prosecutors. That'll be in federal court. And then there's the civil side of it, which is where folks are being sued so that the state can try to get some of the welfare money back. So those suits, I suspect, will take 2, 3, 4 more years potentially as they work their way through the system, simply because there are so many people at the heart of it and there's so much money that was misspent. At
the end of the day, are we going to see recovery from this matter? What's going to happen at the end of the day? What do Mississippians expect from all of this?
I hope that we'll be able to recover as much money as possible. But look, I'm a realist and I don't like sugarcoating the truth. I mean, the truth is that in Mississippi, my team found that the state had misspent north of $100 million of welfare funds, and if anybody's expecting the state to get back $100 million, that's not going to happen. We'll be lucky to probably get 10 cents on the dollar. I just think it's important that the state continue to pursue that litigation to try to get the money back, and that's what the agency, the Department of Human Services, is now trying to do.
With the feds, what are you expecting from the feds, or will they be involved in more of this at all?
So, there was a full federal investigation conducted by the FBI, and federal prosecutors decided to indict and prosecute several individuals. Really, the piece that we're waiting on from the feds is their last remaining prosecution of 1 individual. So that case will go forward, and that will be their part of it.
Do we truly have systems and policies in place to make sure that such a scandal won't happen again in Mississippi? And if we don't, what do we need to have in place?
I worry that we don't have enough systems in place to prevent something like this from happening. I was encouraged very early on because after the welfare scandal, the Department of Human Services stood up a fraud investigations unit, and that's good, and we needed that. But at the same time, I still see tons of waste in government. I still see tons of inefficiencies all over the place, not just that agency. And so I'm concerned, of course, that we're not, as a state government, spending taxpayer money wisely. As auditor, I'm not allowed to do anything about it. We audit. That's all we do in the auditor's office. So we can find the waste, the fraud, and the abuse, but it's up to other folks to actually make policy changes so that it stops happening.
And why do you think we're not more aggressive on making policies or cracking down on the waste?
Well, I may be a little bit jaded, but I'll tell you that every time that we find waste or abuse, sometimes it's because there may be somebody in a state agency in government who's just not getting a good deal for the taxpayers. They're not doing their job particularly well. But a lot of times that waste is really there because somebody powerful is benefiting from that waste, and as a result, they're fine with it being there. So a lot of times in the auditor's office, when we produce a report on waste, the reaction from some of the powerful folks in Jackson is not to say, hey, thank you for pointing that out, let's fix it. It's to say, hey, stop looking for waste. And that's really the wrong attitude to have, but we're not gonna let that stop us in the auditor's office. We're gonna keep pushing.
This has already been a very active legislative session for you and your office. We saw the Senate on Tuesday table a bill that would have put new limits on the audit powers of your office. Yep. What was that all about?
It was a terrible bill. There was a bill authored by a key committee chairman for Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, and the bill was written without our knowledge. We found out about it when it hit the website for the legislature. It was a terrible bill. I called it the Mississippi Corruption Act because it was so bad. It prevented us from investigating some types of nonprofits and some for-profit companies that were getting taxpayer money. It stopped us from looking at waste, looking for waste in state government, stopped us from going to court to get back misspent taxpayer funds. It was just a terrible bill. And so I was pretty vocal about the fact that this bill did not need to pass, and ultimately the bill went through committee on the state Senate side. It went to the floor of the state Senate, and then I think under pressure from taxpayers, not necessarily just from me, but from taxpayers, the author of the bill killed his own bill just a few days ago. So that was a win for the state auditor's office, but I also frankly think it was a win for taxpayers in Mississippi.
Yeah, your office put out a news release that highlighted Lieutenant Governor Hoseman's appointment of Senator David Parker of DeSoto County to chair the Accountability Committee. He authored that bill, passed it through committee, that tabled it himself, as you mentioned. Do you think Hoseman encouraged this bill?
Well, look, if you're the Lieutenant Governor of Mississippi, you have the power to refer any bill to a committee. And so one way that the Lieutenant Governor's office historically has killed bills is you take a bill, and if I don't like your bill, I'm going to send it to 2 or 3 different committees. And that way it makes it very difficult to become law. In this particular case, the bill was written and the Lieutenant Governor's office assigned it to one committee. And they assigned it to the committee that would be easiest to pass it, and that was the committee run by the guy who wrote the bill. So to me, it looked like the Lieutenant Governor was greasing the skids to help this law, or to help this bill become a law, and I thought that was a bad thing. I thought that was a bad idea because the bill itself was an incredibly dangerous and corrupt bill in my mind. What
are your legislative priorities for this session?
So we talked a lot about waste in state government, and we started to put together a list of bills that would help cut down on waste in state government, consolidating back offices for some agencies, for example. So that was one big one. I also think that we have too much money going to administrative fat in our school system and not enough money going to teachers in the classroom. In fact, if you compare Mississippi to other states in the South, Mississippi spends a higher percentage of our K-12 budget outside the classroom on administrative waste than every other state in the South, with the exception of Washington, D.C. So as a graduate of public schools, as somebody whose parent was a public school teacher, I think that we need to be pushing that money into the classroom. One of our big bills this year, one of our ideas this year is to put into legislation this very simple principle. 50% of the dollars that we spend on education ought to be going to teacher salaries, period. That would, number one, cut down on the fat, but number two, it would result in a huge pay increase for those teachers. And that's good for students. It's good for everybody who's involved with the public school system.
Where do you think teacher salaries should be in Mississippi compared to the rest of our region, and where do you want it to be?
Well, look, I think we need to compete with the rest of our region, and we need to have the best paid teachers that we can possibly afford, because that's where the money makes a difference. Now, some people want to raise taxes, or they just want to spend more money on education. To me, that's not the answer. The answer is getting money out of the wasteful spending and getting it into the classroom. If we don't do that, though, we're going to get left behind. So, for example, we always compete with Arkansas for teacher pay, and Arkansas just this past session passed a $13,000 teacher pay increase. So if we don't cut the fat and we don't get the money going to teachers' salaries, we're going to be left behind by these other states around us.
Yeah, you are waiting to see what the lawmakers will propose for appropriations for your office this year. We watched a combative exchange between you and your appropriations vice chair, John Polk of Hattiesburg. There were references to the TANF investigation in your recent Project Momentum study. Let's listen to what he had to say and what went on there.
I am shocked because I have never once been called before this body to testify before any sort of hearing on the DHS scandal, the largest public fraud in state history. And the first question I get in my time as state auditor from a state senator is, hey, did you get the Brett Favre number correct? I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the right way to approach this question.
Did you know any of the principals or employees or anyone connected with Boston Consulting Group before they were employed?
No, none on that team that applied.
Did any of your family members?
No.
No.
And by the way,
not on that team, in the company.
In the company. And by the way, if you assert that, I'm going to sue you for defamation.
I'm not asserting anything. I'm only asking.
Multiple people have asserted that my wife works for Boston Consulting Group, which is not true, has never happened.
I have not mentioned your wife.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing for you that you have not mentioned her.
Well, that's a level of acrimony that many voters might find troubling, especially between party colleagues. Well, what are your thoughts about that in hindsight?
Yeah, I think that I said the truth. And I think that it's important for people to be willing to say the truth, especially when folks are saying things that are just patently untrue. So for example, it wasn't captured in that exchange, but Senator Polk asserted during that exchange that we had not done an RFP process to hire the firm that came in and looked for all this waste, and that was just false. And so I presented it to the media right after that and said, here's the RFP. Here's exactly what we did to get the best deal for the taxpayers. What troubles me about that entire exchange is those folks, those establishment politicians, they seem to have more of a problem with me looking for waste than with the waste itself. So I look at Washington, D.C. right now, and President Trump and Elon Musk are doing an incredible job of identifying really, really dumb spending at the federal level. So we're doing that down here in Mississippi, and yet when we do that down here, you get these establishment politicians who say, hey, no, stop looking for waste. We don't like that. In fact, we're going to ask you some questions about whether or not your wife worked for this company, even though they have no proof that my wife did, and she did not. They just made that up. So those are the kinds of things that, frankly, if you're state auditor, you just have to get used to, but you have to be forceful in pushing back when somebody makes something up.
And is it the way you're going about it that's making people angry, or what is it that you're rubbing people the wrong way here?
To be honest, I think I'm sweet as pie when I talk about this stuff. I talk about the waste in a very factual way. I talk about it in detail, and I tell folks how the agencies are spending their money. And so if an agency is spending $5,800 on a TV screen, or an agency is spending more on cars and travel than their sister agency in Louisiana and Iowa and Arkansas, all of which is stuff that we found, that's important for voters to know, and I'm very clear about exactly what we're finding. The truth is that no matter how you say those facts, it clearly rubs some folks the wrong way. They take it as a criticism that they have been running a wasteful government, and we should probably face the fact that maybe they are running a wasteful government, and maybe the real issue here is that the waste exists and we need to cut it. That's the real problem.
Both Attorney General Fitch and Lieutenant Governor Hosemann have said that your $2 million contract with Boston Consulting was essentially illegal. What do you say, or how do you feel about that?
Just totally wrong. Just totally wrong. And look, that's not the first time I've disagreed with the Attorney General on a matter of law. She sued me last year to stop me from getting back some of the welfare money. I won that lawsuit. So not the first time that we've disagreed, not the first time I'm going to be right on an issue like this. I'll tell you, the thing that really troubled me was not just their statement that we shouldn't have been doing this study on waste. It was what happened after that. They went to the legislature, and the Attorney General, in coordination with a key chairman for Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, worked together to write a bill to take away my ability in my office to look for waste. So, number one, they clearly believe I have the authority to look for waste, otherwise they wouldn't try to take away my authority to do it. But number two, what a terrible outcome for them to try to strip authority away from the auditor's office. They may not like me, but look, one day I'm not going to be state auditor. And at that moment, do we want to have a toothless watchdog to look at taxpayer funds? No, we want to have an auditor's office that can continue to stand up for transparency for taxpayers.
Why use an out-of-state firm for the study?
We did a competitive bidding process, and they were the most talented firm that came in cheapest for the taxpayers. If I had picked a more expensive firm, you would have asked me, why'd you pick the most expensive firm? That's probably what would have happened.
Do you think Lynn Finch and Delbert Hosemann are actively seeking to undermine your work and your prospects as a potential candidate for governor?
When a key committee chairman for Delbert Hosemann and the AG's office work together on a bill to strip the auditor's office of authority, how can you see it any other way?
Do you think, should voters be concerned that such political competition is getting in the way of good government?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely they should. I wake up every day and I do my job every single day. And for whatever reason, at the end of some of those days, I get sued to stop me from recovering taxpayer money. I get told that legally I'm not allowed to do what I am doing, which is look for waste, which is what auditors are supposed to do. There are bills written to strip my office of authority. So yeah, when folks do stuff like that to get in the way of the state auditor doing his or her job, it is a problem, and it stands in the way of good government.
Oftentimes you'd see this fight between Democrats and Republicans, but you're seeing this fight within the Republican Party. Why are we seeing this fight within the Republican Party?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the difference between someone who is a more establishment politician and someone who is coming in and trying to do the right thing for normal taxpayers every single day. And look, that fight can happen inside parties, it can happen between parties, and it just so happens right now it's happening inside the Republican Party.
Do you consider yourself an outsider in the Republican Party, or how do you fit in the Republican
Well,
Party?
certainly I don't wake up thinking about protecting the most powerful or famous or richest constituents in my district every single day, and that apparently is how some people think about their jobs.
You've just filed your campaign finance report for 2024. You're reporting almost $3 million cash on hand. Delbert Hoseman has about $1.6 million, though he did outraise you in 2024. Lynn Fitch reports $2.5 million on hand. Given those numbers, how do you feel about your odds in 2027 as a race for governor?
Well, look, I think that those numbers and our cash on hand lead over everyone else. I don't think that says anything special about me. I think it says something special about the people of Mississippi, that folks are not just going to be content to vote for the next person up, that they're going to look under the hood, that they want the best possible leadership for the future of the state. They're going to ask those people who are running tough questions. They're going to want to know about their vision for the future of the state. And so I go out there and I talk a lot about what we've done in the State Auditor's office, but I also talk a lot about the future of our state, how we need to give parents more options in the school system, how we need to cut waste, we need to cut fat. We need to pay our cops more so that our streets will be safer. We need to change our universities from being places where we have terrible majors that waste students' time and don't teach them anything and turn them into economic growth engines for the future of the state. And when I talk about that stuff, I think it resonates with people, and I think that's why you see those fundraising numbers. Folks are ready to hear that, and they're ready for somebody to voice that kind of leadership for the future of the state.
There's been a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the national level and even at the state house right now. Where's your position on that, on DEI?
I'm very clearly against it because I've talked for the last few years about wasteful spending and wasteful spending that's going to DEI offices, particularly at our taxpayer-funded universities. You know, at one university we had a DEI officer who was making more money than the governor of Mississippi and the lieutenant governor combined. That is not acceptable spending. And when you dig into that office, that DEI office, the stuff they were doing was simply crazy. So they had a grant to pay for social justice yoga for preschoolers. This is just absolutely silly stuff that taxpayers should not be financing. So for the last few years, I've been talking about the millions of taxpayer dollars that go toward DEI at these universities. And now for the first time, thank goodness, we have two bills, one coming from the House and one coming from the Senate, that would affect DEI. The House bill is much, much stronger. It would kill DEI at our universities. It would actually give people the ability to sue the universities if they violated that law. The Senate bill coming from Lieutenant Governor Hoseman's chamber is much weaker, so I encourage people to support the House bill, but really I'm grateful at the end of the day that we're doing something, that the lawmakers are doing something finally about DEI.
What about tax reforms? Where do you stand on the issues of tax reform?
It's a big debate right now, and my hope is that eventually we as a state will eliminate the state income tax. If you compare Mississippi to other states around us, and you look at the state and local tax burden on Mississippians, we have a higher state and local tax burden on our folks than Louisiana has on their folks, than Alabama has, than Tennessee has, than Florida has, than Georgia has, than Texas has, than South Carolina has. So we very clearly need to reduce taxes so that government can get out of the way and businesses can flourish. I'm waiting to see what the two competing proposals are from both chambers before saying anything about it, but I'm hopeful that we'll cut taxes, and I'm hopeful that they'll eventually eliminate the income tax.
And if you eliminate the income tax, where do you make up the difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time you make up the difference on growth if you phase it out. And so any bill should have some sort of plan to phase out the income tax and get us to the place where that's eliminated, but done so in a responsible way. We'll see what the other competing proposals are, but I'm hopeful that the number crunchers at the legislature will be able to put a plan together. I know the House has one plan. They're waiting on the Senate's plan right now, and hopefully there'll be a good common sense deal that comes out of that cuts taxes on Mississippi.
What about increasing the gas tax?
I'm absolutely against that. And one reason I'm against it is the gas tax hurts the poorest folks in Mississippi. So my dad's an oil field pumper in Jones County. My grandfather was an oil field pumper in Jones County. You know, they have to hop in the truck every single day, and they pay for their own gas to ride around and look at all the oil field pumps that help fuel our lives. And if you raise gas taxes, those are the people that are hurt the most. So I'm against raising the gas tax for any reason.
So how do you fund MDOT, who wants more money for roads and bridges? Where do you get that money for them?
Yeah, you know, MDOT has put forward several proposals over the course of the last few years. Some of those proposals were bonded, so that means the state takes on some debt if we need to build a new road. Those are the kinds of things I think we should be looking for, but we should absolutely 100% not increase the gas tax.
All right. So running for governor. When will you officially announce that you'll be running for governor?
This has been a fun interview, and I appreciate your time. I'll let you know when that day comes.
All right, Shad White, always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right, and we'll be right back. If you have comments or questions about today's show or suggestions for an interview or a segment, just drop us a line. Email our producers. The address is news@WJTV.com. Big thanks to State Auditor Shad White for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.